Good evening. Welcome to Sasakiya Seams, where you can sit back, relax, and learn. This week, we are making the pattern for straight cut jeans. I begin by cutting out some paper. Now, I am ironing out the paper as it has gotten wrinkled during my move. This is perfectly okay to do if you do not use steam, despite what my old pattern making teacher used to say. Also, say hello to my bisexual alpaca hydrangea. Here, I am going through my very messy pattern rack to pull the pants block I made for my boyfriend. If you want a video series on how to make a pants block, leave a comment below. I pull out my folding table I got from IKEA. It's nice and portable, and even serviceable for pattern making. The creases where they fold is a bit annoying though. To make the straight jeans pattern, I am following the directions from Patternmaking for Menswear Classic to Contemporary by Myung-gok Kim and Inju Kim. Link provided in the description. First, I start with the front block. I recommend you weigh it down before tracing. Yes, I am using dumbbells. And yes, my heaviest dumbbell is 8 pounds. I have twink arms. I always skip arm day. I am tracing an extra 1/8 inch around the block, as my original block has 1/2 inch seam allowance. Jeans are sewn using flat fell seams, which is 5/8 inch seam allowance. I also make sure to mark the notch marks and the top and bottom of the grain line. I extend out the hem by 1/2 inch on each side to create points K and L. I drop the waist by 1 inch using my 1-inch ruler to draw a parallel line to the waist. The intersection of the waist and the crotch seam makes B prime, and the intersection between the waist and the outer side seam makes A. 1/2 inch from the grain line toward the outer side seam, I mark point B. I measure 3 inches down along the outer side seam to mark C. I'm using my hip curve ruler to connect B and C to create the jean pocket opening. I extend the pocket opening a 1/4 inch from C to create point H. This is to add ease to the pocket opening to better hold things. Sorry, my boyfriend bumped into the camera. No, I do not notice and fix this. I shorten the upper hip line by a 1/4 inch to create J. I use the hip curve ruler again to connect H to J and then feed back into the original outer side seam. Now, I draw perpendicular lines from points K and L to create the straight cut. I extend out the inner side seam by an additional 1/8 inch because it would have made the knee measurement smaller, not bigger like desired. Most times you do not need to do this, but in this case I have to do this because of the deep crotch curve from my boyfriend's pants block. He's got an S curve to make any late Victorian woman jealous, and a lot of junk in his trunk. Not that I'm complaining. Well, maybe for his back health. His back is a bag of rocks. Where the perpendicular lines intersect the knee line, mark M for the inner side seam and N for the outer side seam. Then I blend M into the crotch intersection and N into the hip line.
Oh, I love you too, random song.
I connect the top and bottom of the grain line using my extremely long metal ruler. Now, here I cut out the front pants block before measuring the seam allowance. Usually, you should make the back pants pattern and the front pants patterns corresponding seam allowance match up first. It's okay. I'll just make sure that the back pants seam allowance matches up first before cutting. I also cut along the pocket opening seam allowance. Oh, maybe my boyfriend did me a favor. I was worried I would be bent over a table in front of the camera. Not that I am monetized, but I am trying to stay PG here. I add 3/8 inch seam allowance on the pocket opening. I saved the cutout for later. Now, I move on to the back pants block. At this moment, I realized that this was another front pants block piece from a previous fitting iteration. I now go looking for the back pants block, and unfortunately walk off with my pencil too. There we go, I found the back pants block. Oh no, the consequences of my actions. Where is my pencil? Ah, there, I found it. I left it on the table behind the camera. Okay, so now, finally, I trace my back pants block pattern, making sure to add 1/8 inch seam allowance like I did with the front. I extend out the pants hem by a 1/2 inch on the outer side seam to make point L, and 5/8 inch on the inner side seam to make point K to match the front pants pattern. I start by sketching out the back patch pocket. I draw a perpendicular line from J. I measure 1/2 inch in away from the outer side seam from the perpendicular line from J, and 1/2 inch above the hip line. This I make the bottom corner of the patch pocket. I measure the center of the hem, and then measure 7.5 inches down, parallel from the line made from J. I connect the bottom side corner and the bottom corner of the patch pocket. Then I make sure that the pocket is symmetrical. I go in from the waist from A by a 1/4 inch, which makes point E. I also drop the waist seam 1 inch like I did to the front. This makes point A intersecting the waist and crotch seam, and B which is intersecting the waist and outer side seam. I make the back dart an 1/8 inch smaller on each side, so the waist measurement is unchanged. Also, mark the notch and top and bottom of the grain line, and I connect the grain line with my big boy. Moving on. Now, according to the directions, I shorten the dart by a 1/2 inch, which is below the yoke seam. I think this is an entirely unnecessary step. Feel free to skip this. What a waste of time. I measure down along the crotch seam 3 1/4 inch to mark point C. I connect E to C. Then I measure 1 1/4 inch from point B along the outer side seam to make point D. Connect C and D to make the back yoke seam. I measure 1 inch down from the yoke seam and 1 1/2 inch from the crotch seam to make point I. I measure a parallel line down 1 1/2 inches from the yoke seam and extend 7 1/2 inches from point I to make point J. This is where the top of the hem of the back patch pocket will go. I draw perpendicular lines from K and L and stop at the knee line to make points M and N like the front pants pattern. Then I use the hip curve ruler to feed M into the crotch intersection on the inner side seam and N into the crotch line on the outer side seam. Now I make sure to measure my seam allowances this time. The outer side seams matched, but the inner side seam of the back pants pattern was a whole ½ inch greater than the front pants pattern, which, to be fair, the back pants inner side seam allowance was 3/8 inch greater than the front pants inner side seam allowance, which is intentional. Typically, there is between 1/4 to 3/8 inch extra seam allowance on the back to provide more room in the back, for obvious reasons. Sometimes the extra seam allowance is in the front if your back is flat and your front is an Anthony Ammirati. Now, I tried to shorten the curve, but eventually just dropped the crotch in 1/8 inch seam allowance so it would match within tolerance. Was that lazy of me? Yes, it's fine. I promise. Don't tell my old pattern making teacher. cut out the back pattern. Looks like I do end up bent over a table in front of the camera. This isn't what it looks like, Neil. I cut along the yoke seam allowance. I hinge off the middle of the dart along the yoke seam allowance and close the dart. I also round where I hinged from so it would sew easier. I add 5/8 inch seam allowance to both the yoke and the back pants at the yoke seam. I then tape some scrap paper to the pocket cutout. I trace 2 inches parallel along the bottom. That should cover seam allowance and make sure that none of the pocketing peeks out from the pocket opening.
underneath it all, everything's actually alright. You're okay. You have more power than you might be giving yourself credit for. And if you have something that's going on in your life right now that's challenging, painful, it's just a reminder to take a little bit better care of yourself. Because you're worth it. You can have this feeling anytime you choose.
At this point, despite not wanting to, I call it a night. It is late, and my lovely boyfriend made me dinner. Okay, so it's the next day, I use a previous pocket pattern from pants I made for my boyfriend earlier. I retraced the outer side seam of the pocket to match the new outer side seam of the pants. I get more paper for the waistband. I fold it in half and staple it to prevent any movement when patterning and later when I'm cutting. This helps to make sure both sides are symmetrical. If my old pattern making teacher has to see anything, let it be this moment. I promise I am a good pattern maker. I draw a perpendicular line from the fold, then add 1-inch parallel lines from either side. Then I add 3/8 inch on one side for the outer waistband seam allowance. Now, most people would add the same amount of seam allowance to the other side, but I do add 3/4 inches to give extra catching room when sewing the waistband later. I mark the fold of the paper as the center back. I measure the back and front waist seam allowance and where the pocket opening is in the front. I mark all these points to notch later and mark the center front. Then I add an additional 2 inches for the button overlap. I cut out the waistband now, which is when I made another mistake. Now you see that I'm pulling out my phone to look how big the button is that I bought for these jeans. It's 20 millimeters. That is approximately 3/4 inch. That is far too big for a 1-inch waistband. I notate to make the waistband a 1/2 inch wider later when I'm cutting. And since I didn't check before cutting out my waistband, I don't know if I made them backwards or not. I go to my closet and look at some jeans. Okay, I am back, and it turns out by some miracle, I did make them correctly. I labeled the piece to be cut out face up as it is asymmetrical due to the button extension. I also used the fly extension from the previous pants pattern, except when I retrace it, I remove an extra inch extension. This was for a pair of pants for a suit, and the extension was 3 inches. I only need 2 inches for these jeans. The fly guard is unchanged, so I don't even bother making a new fly guard piece. Speaking of not making a new pattern piece, I didn't make a pattern piece for my waist interfacing. Now, this is something I would have been docked for in fashion school. Not that I didn't do it. I did that plenty of times. But the thing is, I always got away with it. And my fashion school teachers can't do anything about it. I already have my degree, and you can pry that degree from me, from my cold, dead hands. And with that, I am done with my straight jeans pattern.
The end of our night has come. I hope you enjoyed our time together. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully, I will see you again next week. Until then, have a good night.